welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the world of Indian ports.
Yeah.
We've got this pretty in-depth research report here from Motilal Oswal. It's a leading research firm. And
Yeah, they're good.
yeah, they do great work. And we're going to be using this as a jumping off point to understand how these ports are really crucial to India's goal of becoming a $5 trillion economy.
And it's a fascinating story. It's
Yeah.
really a blend of economics, logistics, and even a little geopolitics.
Oh, for sure.
And I think what you'll see is that these ports are really more than just gateways for trade.
Right.
They're really vital lifelines for India's economic ambitions.
And it's actually pretty amazing when you think about how much these ports actually handle.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking 95% of India's export volume
Huge.
and 70% of its export value.
That's right. It's a lot.
And it's a very complex network, too.
Yeah.
With 13 major ports that are overseen by the central government,
Okay.
and then a whopping 205 non-major ports.
Wow.
And a lot of those operate under public-private partnerships.
So, okay, let's break this down a little bit.
Sure.
What exactly is the difference between a major port and a non-major port?
Okay.
And why are there so many different management models in place?
Good questions.
Yeah.
So think of the major ports, kind of like the heavy hitters.
Okay.
They're strategically located near those big industrial centers, and they handle a wide range of cargo.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, they're often older,
Right.
and they can get congested, especially when everyone's sharing the same access channels.
So that's where the non-major ports come in.
Yeah.
They're kind of more nimble and specialized.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So these ports are often run by state governments or private companies,
Okay.
and they're more adaptable.
Mhm.
They can be customized to meet specific regional needs.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can think of them like the up-and-comers.
Okay.
They're handling almost half of India's cargo now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it seems like this whole sector is just buzzing with activity. Oh, yeah, for sure.
The report predicts a massive expansion in the coming years.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah.
We're looking at an increase of 500 to 550 million metric tons per annum,
Wow.
or MTPA for short,
Okay.
being added every year between now and 2028.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
What's driving that kind of growth?
Well, it's fueled by a lot of things.
Yeah.
You've got increased handling of everything from petroleum products and coal to containerized cargo.
And speaking of containers,
Yeah.
what's the deal with the surge in container traffic?
Well, it's projected to grow between 4 and 7% annually over the next 5 years.
Wow, so companies like Adani Ports and SEZ and JSW Infrastructure,
Yeah.
they seem to be like the rising stars in all this.
They're definitely making waves.
Yeah.
Both companies have been outpacing the industry in terms of growth.
Okay.
Just to give you an idea, Adani Ports saw a 15% compound annual growth rate,
Okay.
or CAGR,
All right.
in volume from 2019 to 2024.
So that means they've been growing at a pretty rapid pace.
Very consistently.
Yeah. Okay. And JSW, what about them?
So get this JSW Infrastructure.
Yeah.
They achieved an even more impressive 25% volume CAGR during the same period.
That's phenomenal.
It is.
So are they just like building more ports than everyone else, or what's going on?
It's not just about brute force expansion.
Sure.
They're creating what are called integrated logistics networks.
Okay.
So think of it like a one-stop shop for cargo movement.
Right.
They handle everything from warehousing and last-mile delivery
Yeah.
to even running container trains.
Wow.
They're building the entire ecosystem around their ports.
So they're really leveraging their port infrastructure to offer these comprehensive solutions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It makes sense in today's fast-paced world.
It does.
But what about the government? Are they just kind of watching all this massive expansion happen?
Oh, no, they're very much involved.
Okay.
They're actually driving key programs to shape this growth.
It's interesting.
And a prime example is the Sagarmala program,
Okay.
which launched back in 2016.
Right.
And the goal there is to boost port capacity to 3,300 MTPA by 2025.
3,300.
Yeah.
That's a huge chunk.
Yeah.
It is. Okay, so what exactly does that entail?
So it involves an investment of around 6 trillion Indian rupees.
Wow.
And that's spread across 800 projects.
800 projects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're talking about modernizing ports,
Yeah.
enhancing connectivity, and developing coastal economic zones.
So it's really about building a more efficient and connected network,
You got it.
not just building bigger ports.
Right. And the potential savings are huge.
Yeah.
We're talking about 350 to 400 billion Indian rupees annually.
That's a lot of rupees.
Yeah, and that's not all.
Okay.
India is thinking even further ahead
Oh.
with the Maritime Vision 2047.
All right, what is that?
Well,
What's the vision for Indian ports in the future?
picture this: 6 mega ports
Okay.
with world-class infrastructure, cutting-edge technology, all aimed at boosting capacity to a mind-boggling 10,000 MTPA by 2047.
10,000.
Yeah.
That's a scale I can barely even comprehend.
It's huge.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's clear that India is really betting big on its maritime sector.
Oh, yeah.
But I imagine with all this ambitious growth,
Mm-hmm.
there got to be some challenges along the way.
Of course.
What are some of those risks and obstacles that the report highlights?
Well, you're right. No growth story is without its hurdles.
Right.
The report points to several key challenges.
Okay.
Things like policy uncertainty,
Okay.
for example, delays in finalizing things like the national ports policy,
Mm-hmm.
or regulations for tariffs
Right.
can make investors pretty nervous.
That makes sense.
Another challenge is infrastructure gaps.
Okay.
Things like inadequate last-mile connectivity. In other words, getting those goods from the port to their final destination smoothly.
And then there are concerns about environmental impact.
Of course.
And then, of course, the ever-present uncertainty of the global economy.
Right. So let's unpack these a little bit.
Sure.
What kind of policy uncertainty are we talking about?
Okay, so.
And how do those infrastructure gaps really play into all of this?
Well, when it comes to policy,
Yeah.
things like delays in finalizing the national ports policy
Mm-hmm.
or regulatory frameworks for tariff rationalization
Okay.
that can make investors hesitant.
Right. Because if you're going to invest a large sum of money in a project,
Exactly.
you want to make sure the rules of the game aren't going to change suddenly.
Right.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about these infrastructure gaps? How do those affect things?
Imagine you have this like super efficient port,
Okay.
but the roads and rail lines leading to and from it
Yeah.
are congested or in poor condition.
Right.
It's going to create a bottleneck,
Yeah.
slow everything down.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And that's what we mean by inadequate last mile connectivity.
The connection between the port and the regions it serves,
Right.
making sure those goods can move quickly inland.
So it's not just about the port itself.
Right.
It's about how it's integrated into the entire transportation network.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And then there are the environmental concerns. Those
Yeah.
are always a major factor with large infrastructure projects.
Absolutely.
Right.
Large-scale projects like this have to take into account things like land acquisition,
Okay.
the potential impact on ecosystems,
Wow.
and even the risks of rising sea levels
Yeah.
and extreme weather
Or
events.
climate change.
Yeah, all those factors need careful consideration.
So it sounds like it's a really complex landscape
It is.
with a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, a lot going on.
But despite all these challenges, it seems like the analysts at Motilal Oswal are pretty optimistic about the outlook for the sector.
They are.
Yeah.
They've given both Adani Ports and JSW Infrastructure a BY rating.
Okay.
Basically, they believe these companies are good investments. In fact, they've even identified JSW Infrastructure as their top pick,
Oh, wow.
meaning they believe it has the most potential for growth.
So this is definitely a sector worth keeping a close eye on.
Oh, for sure.
We've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have.
We've talked about the size and scope of India's port network,
Mhm.
these ambitious growth plans,
Yeah,
the key players,
Yeah.
and some of the challenges that they face.
of course.
But there's another layer to this story
Uh-huh.
that delves into these concerns
Mhm.
surrounding the increasing privatization of these really vital assets.
That's right. And while privatization can bring in investment and efficiency,
right.
it also raises important questions about revenue sharing and the potential for monopolies.
Yeah, and those are issues we need to consider carefully
Yeah.
as this sector continues to evolve.
Absolutely.
So we're going to delve deeper into those concerns in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
But before we go, I want to leave you with this thought. How do you weigh the economic benefits of rapid growth
Mm-hmm.
against the potential risks of concentrated power
Yeah,
in such a strategically important sector?
that's a good question.
Yeah, it's definitely something worth pondering as we continue our exploration.
Absolutely. Picking up where we left off, let's dive a little deeper into those concerns around privatization.
Yeah, you mentioned potential revenue sharing disputes
Right.
between the government and these private companies.
Yeah.
What's at the heart of that issue?
Well, it boils down to finding that right balance
Okay.
between risk and reward.
Mm-hmm.
Private companies want clear and stable terms when they invest large sums of money,
Makes sense.
which is understandable.
Right.
But at the same time, the government also has a duty to protect the public interest
Right.
and make sure that the nation gets a fair return for the use of its assets.
So it's really about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
where everyone feels like they're getting a fair deal.
Exactly. And that's where things can get tricky. When the terms of these agreements aren't crystal clear,
Mm-hmm.
or, when unexpected events occur,
Right.
it can lead to disagreements and disputes.
That makes sense. Now, what about this idea of monopolization?
Right.
Is there a genuine risk that a few companies could end up controlling most of India's port infrastructure?
Well, it's a valid concern.
Yep.
We've already seen how companies like Adani and JSW are expanding aggressively,
Right.
both by building new facilities
Mm.
and acquiring existing ones.
Yeah.
And, this kind of consolidation
Mm-hmm.
can lead to a situation where a handful of players dominate the market.
And why should we be concerned about that?
Oh.
What are the potential downsides of having limited competition in such a vital sector?
Well, for starters, it can stifle innovation.
Right.
When you have a few companies controlling the market,
Yeah.
there's less incentive for them to push boundaries
Right.
and come up with new and more efficient ways of doing things.
Because they're already in a comfortable position.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So why rock the boat?
Right, because competition is what drives progress.
Exactly. And a lack of competition can also lead to higher prices
Yeah.
for consumers
Right.
because there's less pressure on companies to keep their costs down.
Right.
And, when we're talking about critical infrastructure like ports,
Mm.
a lack of competition can even create vulnerabilities.
Vulnerabilities, how so?
Imagine a scenario where a single company controls a large portion of the port network.
Yeah, okay.
If something disrupts their operations,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a natural disaster,
Yeah.
a labor strike,
Right.
or even a cyber attack,
Oh, wow.
it could have ripple effects throughout the entire economy.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
So what can be done to mitigate these risks?
Yeah.
Is it a matter of stricter regulations,
What?
encouraging more competition?
I think it's going to require a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
Robust and transparent regulations are crucial to
Right.
ensure that everyone plays by the rules
Yeah.
and that the public interest is protected.
So what would that involve?
Well, it can involve things like clear guidelines for tariff setting
Okay.
and mechanisms to prevent predatory pricing,
Mean.
where big companies undercut smaller competitors to drive them out of business.
Gotcha. And I imagine it's also important to foster a level playing field
It is.
for smaller players.
Absolutely.
So they have a chance to compete.
Right. This could involve providing incentives for new companies to enter the market,
Okay.
streamlining the approval process for smaller projects,
Mm-hmm.
or even promoting public-private partnerships
Ah.
where ownership and control are shared more broadly.
So it seems like striking the right balance is key.
It is.
Too much regulation can stifle innovation,
Right.
but too little can allow for unchecked dominance.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
It's all about creating an environment that encourages growth and investment
Yeah.
while safeguarding against those potential downsides.
Now let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about some of the operational challenges
Sure.
that Indian ports are facing.
Yeah.
The report goes into some detail about the bottlenecks that are hindering efficiency and growth.
Right.
Can you walk us through some of the key issues?
Yeah. One of the most pressing issues is that lack of adequate last-mile connectivity we
Right.
talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You can have the most state-of-the-art port in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but if the roads and rail links leading to and from the port are congested or inefficient,
Yeah.
it's going to create a major bottleneck.
It's like having a super fast internet connection but a slow computer.
Precisely.
It defeats the purpose.
Exactly. And this is one of the areas where that Sagarmala program aims to make a difference.
Okay.
A significant portion of the investments under this program is going towards enhancing connectivity
Okay.
between ports and their hinterlands,
So meaning
improving those links between the ports and the regions they serve,
okay.
ensuring goods can move swiftly inland.
So it's not just about the ports themselves.
Right.
It's about seamlessly integrating them into the overall transportation network.
Exactly. Another significant challenge is dredging.
Okay.
Many Indian ports have shallow drafts, which
Mm.
means they can't accommodate those largest cargo vessels.
Oh, I see.
And this limits their capacity and efficiency
Mm-hmm.
because those megaships can carry significantly more cargo in a single trip.
So even if you build more berths and terminals,
Yeah.
if the water isn't deep enough,
Right.
You're not maximizing your potential.
Exactly. And dredging is a complex and expensive process.
Yeah.
It requires specialized equipment,
Right.
and it needs to be done with careful consideration for the environment.
Sure.
And it's not a one-time fix either.
Right.
Natural processes like siltation
Mm-hmm.
can gradually reduce the depth of those channels.
I see.
So regular dredging is necessary to maintain those optimal conditions.
Okay. Now, stepping back a bit,
Sure.
the report also highlights the impact of global economic trends on the Indian port sector.
Right?
So let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah.
What are some of the external factors that could influence the growth of this sector?
Well, global trade flows,
Mm-hmm.
commodity prices,
Right.
geopolitical stability,
Right.
all these things play a role. So
For example.
India is a major importer of crude oil and coal.
Yeah.
Fluctuations in the prices of these commodities
Right.
can have a direct impact on the volume of cargo handled at Indian ports.
So if global demand for these commodities slows down,
Right.
or if prices drop significantly,
Yeah,
it could have a ripple effect on port traffic.
precisely. And then there's the broader issue of global economic growth.
Yeah.
If major economies around the world start to slow down, it tends to dampen demand for imports,
Right.
which in turn can reduce cargo volumes at Indian ports.
So it's a good reminder that even a sector that seems as domestic as ports is actually deeply interconnected with the global economy.
Absolutely. And then you have geopolitical risks to consider.
Right.
For instance, tensions in the Middle East, which is a major source of crude oil for India,
Right.
can disrupt shipping routes
Yeah.
and lead to higher transportation costs.
So all these factors can create uncertainty and volatility
Yeah,
for the Indian port sector.
they do.
It sounds like navigating these global headwinds
Yeah,
requires a combination of strategic planning,
for sure.
diversification, and maybe even a bit of luck.
You're right. It's about managing risks,
Yeah.
adapting to changing circumstances, and constantly seeking ways to enhance efficiency and competitiveness.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more aspect that the report highlights,
Okay.
the regulatory framework
Yeah.
that governs the Indian port sector.
Sure. The Indian port sector operates under a multi-layered regulatory framework,
Okay.
with both central and state governments playing a role.
Mm-hmm.
The Major Port Authorities Act of 2021
Okay.
is a key piece of legislation
Right.
that governs the functioning of the 13 major ports.
And what are some of the key points of this act?
Well, it aims to modernize the governance structure of these ports,
Okay.
grants more autonomy to the port authorities, allowing them to set tariffs based on market conditions,
Okay.
and manage their assets more flexibly.
So it's about creating a more business-friendly environment
Yeah,
while ensuring that things are done in a fair and transparent way.
exactly. And in addition to the central legislation, each state has its own maritime board and set of regulations
Right.
that govern the operation of non-major ports within its jurisdiction.
Oh, I see.
So it's a complex web of rules and regulations that can be challenging to navigate.
It sounds like success in the Indian port sector
Yeah.
requires not only operational excellence, but also a deep understanding of the legal and regulatory landscape.
Absolutely. As the sector continues to grow and evolve,
Yeah.
it's likely that the regulatory framework will need to adapt as well
Right.
to address emerging challenges and opportunities.
It's a fascinating and dynamic space to watch.
Yeah.
We've explored the concerns about privatization, the operational challenges,
Right.
the global economic influences,
Yeah.
and even touched on the regulatory framework.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that we've gained a much deeper understanding of the complexities of this sector.
We have indeed. But there's one more detail from the report
Okay.
that I think might surprise you.
All right, I'm all ears.
It offers a glimpse into the strategic thinking
Okay.
of these companies and highlights a trend that's becoming increasingly important in India's trade.
Tell me more.
So the report mentions that both Adani Ports and JSW Infrastructure
Yeah.
are investing heavily in handling a specific type of cargo
Okay.
that's playing a growing role in India's trade mix:
What is it?
containerized cargo.
Ah, you mean those ubiquitous metal boxes
Yeah,
we see stacked up on ships and trucks all over the world?
precisely. And while it might seem like a mundane detail,
Yeah.
it actually points to a significant shift in India's trade patterns
Interesting.
and reflects the growing importance of global supply chains.
Okay.
Essentially, it's a sign that India is becoming more integrated into the global marketplace.
That's fascinating. I'm eager to delve into the implications of this containerization trend.
Yeah.
It sounds like a topic worthy of its own deep dive.
It is indeed, and that's exactly what we'll do in the next part of our exploration.
Right.
We'll unpack the reasons behind this surge in containerized cargo,
Okay.
the challenges it presents, and the opportunities it creates for companies like Adani and JSW.
Stay tuned, folks.
Yeah.
This deep dive is about to get even more interesting, so we're really diving deep into this whole world of containerization. You mentioned it kind of signifies a shift in India's trade patterns.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for me a little bit? And of course, for our listener.
Okay, so think of those standardized shipping containers, like those big metal boxes you see everywhere.
Yeah.
Think of them as like the building blocks of global trade. They've revolutionized the way goods are transported, made the whole process much smoother, faster, more efficient.
So instead of like loading and unloading individual items onto different vehicles,
Right.
you have these pre-packed containers that can move seamlessly from ships to trucks to trains.
Exactly. It's like a giant Lego system for global trade.
That's a great analogy.
And it's particularly beneficial for a rapidly growing economy like India,
Right.
where, efficient logistics are essential for connecting businesses to that global marketplace.
So the report mentions that India's container traffic is expected to see a pretty significant rise over the next 5 years.
It is.
What's driving that growth?
Well, there are several factors at play here.
Okay.
You've got rising import volumes as India's economy expands, and consumers are demanding more goods from all over the world.
Okay.
You also have declining freight costs
Right.
as logistics become more optimized thanks to containerization.
So it makes things cheaper.
Exactly. And let's not forget the gradual normalization of global supply chains
Yeah.
after, all the disruptions of recent years.
Makes sense. So it sounds like it's a perfect storm of factors
Yeah,
creating this surge in container traffic.
it is.
And Adani and JSW, always, astute business minds,
Right.
are positioning themselves to capitalize on this trend.
Absolutely. They're investing heavily in specialized container terminals.
Right.
They're expanding their logistics networks to handle these containers more efficiently. And they're even developing inland container depots
Oh, wow.
to bring goods closer to their final destinations.
So it's like they're really building the infrastructure of the future,
Yeah.
anticipating those needs of this, rapidly evolving global trade landscape.
That's a good way to put it.
But I imagine there are also some challenges
Of course.
associated with this whole containerization, bro.
Sure.
What are some of those hurdles they need to overcome?
Well, for starters, it requires significant investment.
Okay.
We're talking about specialized equipment, like massive cranes, sophisticated tracking systems to manage all these containers,
Right.
and of course, enough space to handle these ever-increasing volumes.
And I imagine acquiring land
Yeah.
for these large terminals,
Oh, it's a huge challenge.
especially near already bustling ports.
Exactly. Land acquisition is often a major bottleneck for these big infrastructure projects.
What about the logistics of just like managing all these containers?
Yeah, that's another hurdle.
Right.
It's a very complex dance to make sure there's smooth and efficient movement of these containers
Right.
between different modes of transport, ships, trucks, trains.
Takes a lot of coordination.
It does. It requires close coordination with multiple stakeholders,
Yeah.
including port authorities, shipping lines, trucking companies, railway operators.
So it's a massive logistical puzzle.
It is, and let's not forget the environmental considerations.
Right. Those container ships, especially the older ones, can be major polluters.
They can.
So how can we make this whole process more sustainable? What are some of the things that are being done to try to reduce that environmental impact of container shipping?
Well, there's a growing push for newer, more fuel-efficient ships.
Right.
There's also a shift towards cleaner fuels and the development of technologies to reduce emissions from port operations.
So it's really about finding that balance
It is.
between, economic growth and environmental responsibility.
Yeah. And that's a theme that runs through this entire deep dive.
It does.
The growth of India's ports. It's a fascinating story.
It is.
Ambition, innovation challenges.
Yeah, we've seen how these ports are really poised to become even more vital to India's economic future.
They are.
How companies like Adani and JSW are strategically, positioning themselves to capitalize on these trends, but also all the hurdles that they face along the way.
And it's a story that touches upon globalization.
Yeah.
The evolution of global supply chains, the need for sustainable development,
Right. Yeah.
that delicate balance between public and private interests.
So what does all this mean for you, our listener out there?
Yeah.
Why should you care about what's happening with Indian ports, even if you're half a world away?
Because it's a window into the forces shaping our world.
Okay.
It's about interconnectedness, the flow of goods and ideas, and the choices we make that impact our collective future.
That's a good point.
What happens in one corner of the world can have ripple effects that touch us all in unexpected ways.
It's a great reminder that we're all part of this intricate global web.
We are.
And on that note, I want to leave you with a final question to ponder.
Okay.
As India's ports continue to grow and evolve,
Yeah.
what role do you envision them playing on that global stage? Should they aim to become like these major transshipment hubs competing with the giants like Singapore and Dubai?
Right.
Or should they prioritize serving India's own burgeoning needs?
It's a really thought-provoking question.
It is.
It delves into strategic ambitions, regional dynamics, and perhaps even a sense of national pride.
Yeah. We'll leave you to wrestle with those ideas until next time, fellow deep divers.
Yeah.
Keep seeking knowledge, asking questions, and exploring this fascinating world around us.